Welcome to Real World, Real Talk with Dr. D.Z. Cofield. The show represents captivating conversations and insightful information to encourage and inspire you with all you need to become the best you can possibly be. And now, your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z. Cofield.
Welcome to Real World, Real Talk. I'm Dr. D.Z. Cofield, your host for this promising show. It's a continuation of our last show. We're highlighting the Negro League Baseball Museum. And some of you may be asking, what is that? And I understand, because the truth of the matter is we have not told our own story. And when our story has been told, it has been so marginalized and minimized that many of us, when we hear Negro League Baseball Museum, we may think of some fly-by-night minor league kind of system, and we don't understand that when the Negro League was playing baseball, they were playing baseball at the highest level. They had arguably the greatest baseball players of all time who were not allowed to play in the major leagues, with white players playing on these fields. There are many of these teams, including the Homestead Grays, who played in the stadium that housed the Washington Senators. More people came out to see the Homestead Grays play and Josh Gibson than came out to see the Washington Senators in Major League Baseball. And that was true around the country. These Negro League teams rented stadiums and filled those stadiums. If they held 17,000, it was 17,000 plus, standing room only. And some of you, if you ever looked at pictures of Negro League games, many of those Negro League games were played on Sunday because many major league teams did not play on Sunday. That was their day of rest. And so that was the primary day those stadiums were available. And so the Negro League teams would play double headers, and you would see people in the stands at the Negro League games, and they would be dressed up. I mean, they would have on their Sunday go to meeting outfits. And the reason was because when they played the double headers, churches would move their service times from 11 o'clock to 10 o'clock so people could get out of church on time so they could get to the games. And the games were an event in and of themselves. Black businesses, entrepreneurship, Black entertainers all thrived when there were good teams in those cities that played in the Negro League Baseball. I am excited to have with me again today Bob Kendrick. He is the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, right on 18th and Vine, where the Negro League was actually given birth to. We're going to continue our discussion with him on today. And man, listen, if you like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on Instagram at DZ Cofield. You can follow me on Twitter at DZ Cofield. You can follow me on Facebook at DZ Cofield. But let's enjoy this moment of history. And as I said before, let's stop allowing other people to not only tell our history, but let's stop allowing other people to tell us when we can celebrate our history. I think I'm going to get a shirt made. And it's going to say this: Black History, 365, 24/7. Because every day is a day of history. All right, let's get to our interview. We can't talk about the Negro Leagues without talking about Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige, who is reported to have thrown a pitch 105 miles an hour. And it's said that he had really large hands and long fingers. It was kind of this God-given gift that when the ball had left other pitchers' hands, it was still on his fingers, and he really extended.
Yeah.
Talk about Satchel Paige and what he meant to the Negro Leagues as a person, because I've seen movies where he's been portrayed as the star.
And he was. He
Yeah.
was. He was the star doc amongst stars. He was the Negro League's biggest star. He drew the biggest crowds. Everybody wanted to see the old man pitch. And he was just special. He absolutely was special. In my estimation, the greatest pitcher of all time.
Yeah.
I really do. I don't know if there'll ever be another Satchel Paige, not someone who combines the longevity. By his estimation, he pitched in over 2,600 games. The great stuff. Recorded some 55 no-hitters and only God knows how many strikeouts. And the charisma. He could sell it. Yeah, he could sell it, but he could also back it up. So Satchel was Muhammad Ali before we ever knew who Muhammad Ali was.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
He had everything you needed, again, to be a star, and he was. And everybody wanted to see the old man pitch. So if he rode into a town, the town might have 1,000 people. You can rest assured that 950 were at the ballpark to see the old man do his thing. Now, by the time he gets to the major leagues, he is believed to be 42 years old. If you believe that he was born in 1906, which I absolutely do not believe. The man that died here in 1982, man, he's seen 76 long time before then. So Satchel was likely born into the early to mid 1890s in Mobile, Alabama. And as you know, particularly for Black folks born in the Deep South of that era, nobody's born in a hospital.
Yeah.
Everybody's born at home to a midwife. And so that birth record was typically kept in the back page of the family Bible.
Yeah.
And it might be days, weeks, months, years, if ever, it was actually taken to the courthouse and recorded as an official birth record. So honestly, there were a lot of people in that era who did not know how old they were. Satchel was one of them. And according to Satchel, the goat ate that page out the Bible. So he had no idea how old he was. And as Satchel would whimsically pose the question, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? Or that age is simply mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. But you're right. They clocked his fastball at 105 miles per hour. But what really made him special, and as you well know, 105 is pretty doggone special.
Yes, sir.
What really made him so special was 105 with pinpoint control. Folks, he could put it exactly where he wanted to. And I'm not talking about throwing strikes. The catcher set the target. He hit the target. He didn't miss. He didn't warm up in the bullpen like most pitchers do, throwing to the catcher across home plate. You know what Satchel would use? A stick of foil chewing gum wrapper. Honest to God's truth. The catcher would sit that chewing gum wrapper on top of home plate. And wherever the catcher moved the chewing gum wrapper, Satchel right over the top of that chewing gum wrapper. And as Satchel would say, he'd work both corners of that chewing gum wrapper. He never lost that control. And so by the time he gets to the major leagues, he couldn't throw it as hard as he once did, but he could still put it exactly where he wanted to put it. And so you mentioned Willie Mays, and I'm out in San Francisco, I guess about 4 years ago, and I'm out there as a guest of one of the local sports talk radio guys, good friend of mine named Brian Murphy. And so when I get there, we go by the stadium, and Willie is at the stadium that day. Matter of fact, Barry Bonds was there, and Orlando Cepeda, a number of legendary Giants were there at the ballpark that day. And Willie, they arranged for me to have a private conversation with Willie. And so we're down in the players' garage area, and Willie's feeling good this day. And my friend Brian asked me, said, well, Willie, did you ever face Satchel Paige? And Doc, Willie lights up. He absolutely lights up. And if you know Willie, he has a very high pitch
Yeah,
voice.
yeah.
He said, yes, I faced Satchel. I faced Satchel when I was 17 years old. The first time I faced Satchel, I got a double off of it. Well, he's 17 years old playing for the Birmingham Black Barons. He's up in the batter's box. The old man don't know who this kid is. He grooves one. He hits it in the gap. He gets a double. He said the next time up, Satchel threw 3 straight right by me. I never saw him. And he said, as I turned to go walk back to the dugout, Satchel steps off the mound and says, now go sit down, little boy. And here was arguably the greatest player in Major League Baseball history, absolutely delighting over remembering being struck out by Satchel Paige. That tells you how great Satchel Paige was. It was the same for Henry Aaron. The Braves bring him back, I believe the year must have been 1968, 69. And the Braves owner, Bill Bartholomew, was trying to help Satchel get his pension. He was a few months shy of his pension. And so they bring him back and they hire him as a pitching coach and a conditioning coach. Well, you know, he's just going to hang out and wasn't really going to do anything, but the old man still wanted to pitch. He pitches a couple of innings in spring training and gave up nothing. He's at supposedly 62 years old at this time. He gives up absolutely nothing in those innings that he pitched. And Henry Aaron said he threw me one that I backed out of the batter's box and it broke across home plate.
Wow. Many attribute the late appreciation of Satchel Paige, especially the recognition of Major League Baseball, to Ted Williams,
yes,
who at his acceptance speech did something that you don't hear players do, and that's applaud other players, and especially Negro League players. And one of the things that happened historically, and I want you to talk a little bit about the significance, was Major Leagues Baseball's recognition of the records of the Negro Leagues. Yeah. How important is that to not just what you do, but to the history of our country and the history of the game?
Extremely important. And you touched on something. It was Ted Williams, upon his own induction into the Hall of Fame in 1966, who used that platform to make a very bold statement that he hoped someday the likes of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson would be voted into the Hall of Fame as symbols of those great stars who weren't there because they had never been given an opportunity. 5 years later, Satchel becomes the first from the Negro Leagues to be inducted. And a lot of people thought that was out of character for Ted Williams, because it probably was out of character for Ted Williams. You know, people looked at Ted very selfishly. Ted liked Ted, and Ted, most great hitters are selfish. You know, people got upset because Ted would take that pitch for a walk instead of hitting it and maybe driving in a run. But Ted, a lot of people did not know, was of Mexican descent. His mother was Mexican. And so he understood. He had played with and against these players. So he understood. He knew how good they were. And it goes back to something we talked about early on. I don't think the superstar major leaguer was ever concerned about integration, because Ted Williams could play. That average major leaguer was very much concerned about integration. But I do think that moment in time is what, along with other things, and I hope the work that we've been doing to elevate the awareness of the Negro Leagues led us to that historic date that you referenced in December, when Major League Baseball announced that it was recognizing the Negro Leagues for exactly what it was, a major league. And a lot of us, Doc, did not know about this commission that Major League Baseball had put together in the late 1960s, 68, 69, that was kind of looking and addressing all these leagues and bringing them into the fold as major leagues. So leagues like the Federal League and these other leagues that really had no real input or of any significance on our sport whatsoever, And yet this league, the Negro Leagues, was blatantly dismissed. Now, the Negro Leagues had as much impact on Major League Baseball, probably more so, because not only was it impacting Major League Baseball after integration, it was impacting Major League Baseball before integration because they were playing in many Major League stadiums.
Yeah.
They're filling up the ballpark, outdrawing many of those Major League teams. Well, Doc, those teams were getting a percentage of the gate and likely all of the concession. So they were making money off of the Negro Leagues, which is one of the reasons that it took so long to integrate the game. I tell people all the time now, anytime they say it ain't about the money, it's always about the money. And Major League teams were making money off the Negro Leagues. And so then after integration, we talked about it, this pool of great talent that would migrate into the major leagues from Jackie Robinson in 1947. And then when you look from 47 until the early 1960s, Major League Baseball saw its largest influx of talent in its history. And the majority of those players came from the Negro Leagues, this league that somehow had been considered less than by this commission. So you know it was blatant dismissal for what the Negro Leagues were. And so for Major League Baseball to come back years later and acknowledge the Negro Leagues is certainly a reckoning. It is atonement. It is a long overdue acknowledgement to those courageous owners and players who built the Negro Leagues. And it was historical from that standpoint. And for me, I wanted to make sure that people understood that the Negro League players were never seeking validation. These athletes knew how good they were, and they knew how good their league was. And as I mentioned earlier, the major leaguers knew how good they were. So they didn't need anybody to validate them. Yeah. But historical merit, this was quite significant. And for the players, the surviving players, and the families of those who have passed on, they were elated, and rightfully so. And so to see the Negro Leagues now have their records rolled into the annals of Major League Baseball history is quite significant. But I also hope it helps people understand how important this museum is in the grand scheme of things. It becomes even more important that the history of these leagues, because what we talked about is they didn't want to play in the Negro Leagues. They had to play in the Negro Leagues. And that should never be lost on us, what they were able to do in the face of adversity.
Bob, if you got a couple more minutes, man, I tell you, I'm enjoying this so much. I want you to talk to our audience just for a moment about baseball and Black economics. Yes. Because I think arguably, while many were fighting for desegregation, desegregation has done more to dismantle our community, whether it's economics, education, health, wellness, than anything else in our country. I think we can argue that we're worse off as a people in total, post desegregation than we were in segregation. Because you had, for example, in the Negro Leagues, you had not just Black players, you had Black umpires, you had Black owners, you had Black businesses, restaurants, and the street hotel in your town and other places where Black businesses thrived because thousands of people came out to see these tremendous athletes. Can you talk about the relationship between baseball and economics?
It's a very strong correlation. As a matter of fact, wherever you had successful Black baseball, you typically had thriving Black economies for the reasons that you just mentioned. Here in Kansas City, 18th and Vine, where the museum is located, was a prominent Black community. Matter of fact, it was one of the most recognized street cross sections as there was anywhere in the world, because you had that intrinsic mixture of jazz and baseball radiating from this one street corner. Well, the stadium was only a few blocks up and over from where the museum operates now. And at that time, it was Mulebach Stadium, white-owned stadium. But when the stadium held about 17,000, But when the Monarchs were playing, it's 17,000 plus, standing room only. There would be a parade that would start here at 18th and Vine and go up to 22nd and Brooklyn. And then when the game was over, all those fans came right back to do business with all those segregated, mandated businesses. What segregation did was it forced ownership. And here in Kansas City, black folks, Doc, could not move outside of a 13 block radius. 13 blocks. That was it. If you went outside the 13 blocks, it wasn't going to happen. But man, within those 13 blocks, you had everything you needed. And so as a result and the success of black baseball, these businesses were flourishing. Negro Leagues Baseball was bringing them a built-in clientele. You see, it wasn't uncommon that these athletes could go into a town, fill up the ballpark, and yet not be able to get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered them. Wow. Or not have a place to stay, so they would sleep on the bus and eat their peanut butter and crackers. Well, black-owned businesses like the Street Hotel, which you mentioned, would emerge, and now they've got a place to stay. And they're bringing them a clientele that was coming in, and they're staying there. And Rube Foster would stand right there on the corner of 18th and Vine with a megaphone. And he's telling everybody who passed by what his Chicago American Giants were going to do to the Kansas City Monarchs. And man, they went out and filled the ballpark up. And so you had nightclubs galore. You had restaurants that were all black owned. You had the hotels, they were black owned. They were fine accommodations. The food was magnificent in those accommodations. And Negro Leagues Baseball was bringing them that clientele that led them to their economic heights. And as we couch it, if there is a bittersweet aspect to the overall story of the Negro Leagues, it lies in the fact that you can directly parallel the rise and fall of the Negro Leagues with the rise and fall of Black economy. And to a great extent, Black economy never recovered from losing the Negro Leagues. So what was good morally, what was good socially, was devastating economically. And again, as I share with my guests, there is always a cost for progress. And Black businesses paid a dear cost for what was deemed progress.
You alluded to something just now, and it's always amazing how each generation thinks what they do is new and innovative and creative. I'm thinking about, for example, hip hop artists and their relationship with basketball. And you just alluded to something that a lot of people don't know, and that's the relationship between jazz and baseball.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit about that, because I found that fascinating to hear how they were tied together, like we see entertainment and entertainers and sports now.
No, it ain't new. No, it's been around forever. And people find it surprising that we're in a complex here known as the museums at 18th and Vine. Our sister museum right across the hall from us is the American Jazz Museum. So yeah, it seemed a little odd to have baseball and jazz at the surface level, but not when you delve into this. The two go hand in hand. And when you walk through our museum, you'll see these beautiful images. There's an image of, you got Lena Horne throwing out the first pitch at an all-star game. Cap Calloway had his own semi-pro Black baseball team. So did Louis Armstrong. As a matter of fact, General Colin Powell, when he visited the museum, told me that his father played for Louis Armstrong's semi-pro team.
Wow.
Armstrong's Secret Nine, based out of New Orleans, as they would say. And so, interestingly enough, all the jazz musicians wanted to be baseball players. All the baseball players wanted to be jazz musicians. And so it was only fitting they'd come together here at 18th and Vine, where you had the best of both worlds. Yeah, old Buck used to tell a story. They had played, the Monarch Doc had played a game here in Kansas City on a Saturday. And so everybody gonna go home, get cleaned up, and they're going to meet at a club here at 18th and Vine that was called a Subway. And it was called the Subway because the club was actually down below street level. And as Buck would describe, they all sitting around the table, sipping on a little tea. When a kid walked in, he's got a horn over his shoulder. He wants to blow. Everybody said, well, let him blow. Well, Buck said this kid gets up on stage and Donkey starts making some noises out of this horn they ain't never heard before, but you had to pay attention. That kid was 17-year-old Charlie Yardbird Parker, who went to school right up the hill from the museum at Lincoln High School. So that's the kind of star power that we were talking about. So this whole evolution that we see in and around basketball in particular, this is nothing new.
Yeah.
It was there all the time as part of the Negro Leagues.
Wow. March is Women's History Month, and we're celebrating women, and a lot of people don't know the role that women played in the Negro League. We talked a little bit about Effa Manley, and we can go back to her, of course, but I want to talk about the women who played in the Negro League, because I was blown away when I saw their names and heard a little bit about their story. Tell us about the women who played in this, because, you know, when you talk about the Negro League itself, it was a league of protests, and to embrace women, not just in management, which was historic, but to have women on the field, to have women playing field positions and pitching. I mean, that's unbelievable, man. We made such a big thing about that young lady who pitched several years ago in the Little League World Series, and it was warranted.
So yeah, no,
it was justified, but she wasn't the first.
Oh no. And what you have to understand is that Black women were excluded from playing for the All-American Girls Professional League. As a matter of fact, the three women that you're referencing, Toni Stone, Mamie Peanut Johnson, and Connie Morgan, all pioneers, women who competed with and against the men in the 1950s. Well, Mamie Johnson was the only one of the three that had wanted to try out for the All-American Girls Professional League. And if for those of you who may have seen the blockbuster movie, A League of Their Own,
right,
that is what inspired that film. And you might remember there's a scene where the ball gets loose and the sister picks it up and fires it back to Gina Davis. And you can see everybody kind of like, whoa, you know, and I think that was the late, great Penny Marshall's way of letting people know that Black women had been excluded. Mamie Johnson wanted to try out, but had been denied because of the color of her skin. But as fate would have it, she would get an even greater opportunity because shortly thereafter, she got a tryout for the Indianapolis Clowns. Toni Stone is the first female of professional baseball. All three played for the Indianapolis Clowns. Toni Stone took the roster place of the legendary Henry Aaron. The Clowns had signed Henry Aaron, as we mentioned, in 1952. By the end of the 52 season, he had signed with the Braves. The Clowns replaced him with Toni Stone. And so was there a marketing angle to it? Of course. The Negro Leagues were losing their primary fan base to Major League Baseball. All this great Black talent had now moved into the Major Leagues, and we followed them to the Major Leagues because we wanted to see how our great Black stars were going to fare now that they had an opportunity. So they signed Toni Stone hoping to attract a new clientele, women. And women came out to watch Toni play. So, but it doesn't diminish how gifted athletically all three of them were. And Mamie Johnson was a 5'3" pitcher with a strong right arm. And she got a nickname Peanut. They're playing against Kansas City Monarchs. And the Monarchs had a player named Hank Bayless. And Hank Bayless gets in the batter's box. He looks on the mound and sees this woman on the mound. And he looks out and glares at her and like, what you doing out there on the mound? You ain't no bigger than a peanut. She promptly struck him out, and her nickname was Peanut until the day she died in 2017. I had the tremendous honor of speaking at her funeral services. I knew Miss Johnson quite well. She spent many occasions out here in Kansas City with us. She was just an absolute delight to be around. Before she passed away, we unveiled bronze busts of the three women that are proudly on display here at the Negro Leagues Museum. And she passed away that very next year. But she was so proud of not only herself, but Toni Stone and Connie Morgan, who were pioneers women who competed with and against the men in the Negro Leagues.
Yeah. 2020 will be a year that we remember because of COVID-19, of course, but it was the year to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Negro Leagues, and that was to take place at the culmination of the Major League Baseball season. What has been done and what other things are you doing and planning to do to celebrate the history of the Negro Leagues?
In spite of all the challenges that not only Negro Leagues Museum faced, but people around the world primarily dealing with a pandemic, we were still able, Doc, to salvage a lot of the 100th anniversary celebration. We had such high hopes coming into 2020 with what the platform would be. The 100th anniversary would provide this museum, and we had planned a year-long celebration, and we were going to launch a fairly significant fundraising campaign to help create a long-needed endowment for this museum. We've been able to operate successfully, but we still don't have an endowment. And so most museums start with an endowment already in place. This one started in such a grassroots fashion. We always tell people we started with a hope and a prayer. But we've been able to navigate the economic landscape. But this was going to be the genesis that would get us in a position to create this endowment so that this museum will be able to operate into perpetuity. And so there was a lot riding on the 100th anniversary celebration. We get off to a flying start. We commemorate the actual 100th anniversary on February 13th. We've got the commissioner of Major League Baseball with us, and Xavier James, chief operating officer of the Players Association, the mayor of Kansas City, the Honorable Quentin Lucas, and Frank White, legendary Kansas City Royal, 8-time Gold Glove winner, now Jackson County executive, John Sherman, the owner of the Kansas City Royals, the lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri, Mike Kehoe. We all reconvene at the Paseo YMCA. Wow. 100 years from the date that Rube Foster signed these leagues into existence, Major League Baseball and the Players Association announced a joint $1 million contribution. We rolled out our plans for this year-long celebration. We're off to a flying start. And man, less than 30 days later, everything came to a screeching halt, just like that. And so the virus shut us down for 3 months, from March 14th through June 16th. We finally reopened and started back to operating under Kansas City's 25% capacity protocol. And so we're back to business, not business as usual, but we're back to business. But we were able, through a level of engagement that really started with a simple idea, to do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro Leagues. And as you know, in our sport, there's nothing more honorable that a ball player can do than just simply tipping their cap. It is the ultimate show of respect. And so I had this crazy idea that we were initially going to do a tip your cap in stadium. June 27th of last year, all the teams and fans were going to tip their cap and salute to the Negro Leagues. But it became very apparent that at that time, we didn't even know if baseball or when baseball was coming back, but it wasn't going to be there June 27th. And so at this point, it's like, okay, what can we do to salvage something around this celebration? And I came up with this crazy idea to do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro Leagues. And I reached out to a couple of friends of mine, my good friend, the great writer, Joe Posnanski, who penned the award-winning book on Buck O'Neil called The Soul of Baseball, a road trip through Buck O'Neil's America. And Joe's like my brother. We're not biological brothers, but we're brothers from another mother. There's no question about that. And so usually when I got a bad idea, I vet it with Joe. And I called Joe. I said, Joe, I want to see if we can do a virtual tip your cap. See if we can get maybe some fans, maybe a few ball players, a few dignitaries to take a picture or video of themselves tipping their cap. I'm waiting on him to tell me, Bob, you crazy. Don't even waste your time trying to do this. He thought it was a great idea. Called his business partner who thought it also was a great idea. Doc, we rolled out this campaign on June 29th. And when we rolled it out with 4 U.S. presidents tipping their cap. President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton, President Jimmy Carter, General Colin Powell, transcending athletes like Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Billie Jean King, Bob Costas, Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien. Man, we went into outer space, literally into outer space, and got a tip of the cap from astronaut Chris Cassidy, who was aboard the International Space Station. Wow. And when that happened, I knew then that we had something that was pretty special. This virtual campaign goes viral, and it started to generate a level of engagement around the Negro Leagues and this museum that we had not seen before. And it literally propelled us through the rest of the year. And so we had an amazing year in spite the challenges that we faced, not only with the virus, but a realm of social injustice that was reminiscent of the 1960s. And the museum found itself right in the middle of it, but not necessarily in a negative way. Yeah. People started to turn to the museum for thought leadership. And it was with the understanding that this museum is a social justice museum. It is a civil rights museum. It is just seen through the lens of baseball, but more importantly, it is triumph over that adversity. And that story has to be told too.
Yeah. I cannot end this interview without you talking about, for many, the greatest storyteller of the Negro Leagues. Some would say the modern father of the history of the Negro League, and that's Mr. Buck O'Neil.
Yeah.
Talk about a man that you were privileged to know and love and spend time with. That documentary that he did when he was, I believe, in his early 80s.
About 82.
Yeah, man, yeah. I remember watching it going like, oh my God, I just want to hear this guy talk and talk and talk.
And you weren't the only one.
I was like, I don't care what the other people got to say. I want to hear him.
Yeah.
Hear him.
He literally stole the show. And the documentary that Doc is referring to is Ken Burns' epic documentary on the history of baseball.
Yeah.
And the primary inning that focused on Buck, he's throughout the documentary, but the seventh, I think it was seventh inning, it's called Shadow Ball. And Buck became an overnight sensation at age 82. People fell in love with this very charming, beautiful man who was telling these wonderful stories about baseball to baseball fans that they'd never heard before. And Doc, he was doing it with a twinkle in his eye.
Oh my God, man.
And a smile that lit up the screen.
Yeah.
And America fell in love with Buck. He was 82 years old at that time. And he said, Bob, I've been telling these stories for 40 years and nobody ever listened. And then Ken Burns gave him a platform and people listened. And then God blessed him to live another 12 years where he was literally gallivanting across this country, preaching the gospel and the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of his museum to any and everybody who would listen. And guess who's along for the ride? Oh, and I guess, Doc, I'm hanging on his coattail. So I am proudly one of his disciples. And I got to witness this everywhere that we went. The man never met a stranger in his life. You know, once he met you, it was like as if you all had known each other your entire lives. And everywhere we went, it was that way. And so Buck had been a great ball player himself, one of the legends of the Negro Leagues. But you're right, his role as an ambassador, his role as this bridge builder, his role in building this great museum is really what people fell in love with him. We all fell in love with Buck. We never saw him play, but we fell in love with the Buck O'Neil who told us about the heroes of the Negro Leagues. We fell in love with the Buck O'Neil who so beautifully and vividly demonstrated to all of us that you could indeed get further in this life with love than you could with hate. That's the Buck O'Neil that we fell in love with. And people would oftentimes ask me what I remember most about Buck. And there were so many. I mean, traveling all over the country, playing golf, all these things that we did. But the thing that struck me most about Buck, and I think it speaks to this innateness that he had, you always felt better leaving Buck than you did when you came to see him. You just could not be down when you were around him. His spirit would just uplift you. And there was something very special, something very divine about this man. And I am one, and I would assume that you probably share this sentiment that we're all here for a purpose.
Yeah.
We all have a purpose. And now sometimes we don't identify with that purpose. Other times we run from that purpose. But Buck O'Neil embraced his purpose. And then he lived it out so that we could all witness it. And I think for all of us who got to know Buck, we're better as a result of.
Yeah, I tell you what, man, I felt like, man, he was like my grandfather. Like I just wanted to go hug him and just sit there and just let him talk and what you want to eat, what you want to drink. I'm just keep on talking. Turn the tape recorder on, just keep on talking. I want you to talk to this generation. I told you when we were off air, I was talking to some of my production team and they're millennials. And I said, Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And they were like, what is that? They just don't know.
Yeah.
And I think especially in the times that we live in, this is such a central part to our story.
It is.
I literally feel empowered when I hear the stories of these men and women who had the courage to say, okay, you're not going to let us play with you. Let's take our ball, our bat, our glove, and we're going to play with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't need your approval. If you give it to us, that's great, but we don't need it in order to do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to talk for a moment about the importance of what your museum stands for and how people can interact with it. Because I know you're doing some things on the digital platform now.
Yes.
Of course, people can come and see the museum in person, and I plan on coming to 18th and Vine, and I'm gonna holler at you when I get there.
You got to, man. You absolutely have to.
But I want you to talk about how this generation and what those of us can do who have an appreciation and a tie to that history, what we can do to help spread the truth and the gospel of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
And I think it's important that we identify with ourselves. And it can't just be the downtrodden side of our journey, our plight in this country. Our success stories have never been valued the way that they should. And for me, Doc, the Negro Leagues is one of those great American success stories. And so our children need to identify with that. And so what we talk about, again, is what they were able to do in the face of adversity. Our story is not about the adversity. It's what they were able to do to overcome the adversity. That's the real story. And that is a story that transcends race, transcends age, and it transcends gender. And so these kinds of stories have to be preserved. We have to celebrate, we have to educate, we have to illuminate, and then I have to find ways to make it relevant to those young people that you're referencing. I can't always wait for them to come to me. I've got to come to them in ways in which they can relate. Because I do think one of the things that we've kind of fallen victim of is the belief that our kids don't necessarily appreciate history. I think they do, but it becomes incumbent and particularly important on how we present history to them. So if I've got to give history a level of coolness, then so be it. And I need to figure out how I get them to that point where they understand, they embrace it, and then I think they will absolutely appreciate it. That's what makes the Negro Leagues so special. It's a little bit of everything associated with the Negro Leagues. I remember walking into a meeting at BET and all these young kids in there, and I'm getting ready to talk about the Negro Leagues. And the first thing I said to them was the Negro Leagues were hip hop in a jazz era. And their eyes got big because they want to hear how in the world this old man came up with this notion. But you think about hip hop. hip hop was considered to be this faddish trend, that it was going to die.
Yeah.
Looked at the Negro Leagues the same way. Now hip hop is the most pervasive art form, whether you like it or not. It is the most pervasive art form on the face of the planet. It sets trends. Well, the Negro Leagues had the same kind of defiant stance in the way that you just talked about it. You won't let me play with you, I create my own. And a lot of people thought the Negro Leagues would never last. Well, it operated for 40 years and it literally changed the game, changed how the game was played, and it changed this country for the better. And so those parallels are not just something that this old man kind of created. They are stark, and they remind us again of the boldness, what it requires to overcome obstacles, and how you go about it. But at the root of it, it's all about passion. It's all about passion. Do you love it? Do you, and how much do you love it? And they loved it so much that they were willing to deal with whatever they had to deal with to play this game. And their love of the game changed the game and changed our country. And that is relatable to virtually everyone, because we all have something that we should be passionate about. And if you haven't identified with your passion, you have to do that. And then you have to pursue that passion with all your mind, with all your heart, and with all your soul. And to me, that becomes even more evidence in this story that we document here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
How can somebody support the museum? How can somebody tip their cap to the museum?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not literally in terms of tipping their cap, although they can do that as well, but be able to donate to the museum and invest in this piece of history.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, Doc, the Negro Leagues Museum doesn't need to survive. It has to survive so that we don't lose this precious piece of baseball and Americana, so that our children will have a place where they can come and learn something that none of us were privy to during our own formal educations. But not only learn it for its tremendous educational value, but also its very much inspirational value. And so again, it has to be here. The people who played in these leagues are all going to be gone. It's not a matter of if, it's simply a matter of when.
Yeah.
And not only that, the people who saw them play are all going to be gone. We cannot allow their story to die when that last Negro leaguer leaves the face of this earth. This museum has to survive. And so we would more than welcome your consideration to support us. You can learn more about the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum on the World Wide Web at nlbm.com. You can make a contribution. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization. You can become a member of our organization. You can buy on our online gift store and get your gear, and all these things support our operational needs. And we just continue to work collaboratively to make sure that the history of the Negro League plays on, that the legacy of the Negro League plays on. And that's what our mission is all about.
I tell you, when we think about these great stars, in a very real sense, the stars that many people know about in the modern era were given permission to be who they are today because of the sacrifices and the foundation that was laid by these Negro League baseball players. And, I was telling you offline, one of the men of our church, John Mills, who passed away right after I came to our church, 26 years ago. We were talking, and I was asking him, just tell me about his life. I just always have enjoyed sitting around talking to old people. And he was a semi-pro baseball player. Mm-hmm. He worked in factories, and he was a pitcher, among other positions he played. And he just started telling me the joy of playing against Satchel Paige and those barnstorming days when those guys were, pile in the cars and buses. They show up, man, and it was like the festival of all festivals, man, for the Black community. Man, people were cooking and barbecuing, and they were just having a great time, and they play a doubleheader. And he talked about how he beat Satchel Paige 1-0. He's talking about, man, He's talking about the guy who got a lucky hit and got on and then able to score and all of his crazy pitches. You know, he didn't talk about fastballs and curveballs, right? He talked about the swoop and the upswing and and all kinds of stuff. But it was just amazing to hear a game that brought so much joy to people in the midst of everything else that was going on. You know, I grew up in the city, and you know, as people migrated to the city and you lost the space and the land to play baseball, you know, basketball, I always tell people basketball is not a black people's game, it's an urban game. You know, when black people were living on farms, we didn't play a whole lot of basketball. You know, when we got into the inner city, that's when we, you know, started playing basketball, and it was a relatively easy game to play. You didn't need a lot of equipment, etc. But the history of baseball, the history of this country is so powerful. And Bob, I want to just say to you, thank you, man, for being a custodian of this legacy. And I know you feel, I'm sure at times, the burden, but also the privilege of being a custodian of this legacy and being able to share this with generations now, and to see it positioned to be able to be shared with generations to come.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, man. It's a tremendous honor to do this work, and I feel tremendously blessed to have basically been handed the baton from Buck O'Neill, who started this project in 1990 and served as its longtime chairman for 16 years before he passed away at age 94, a month shy of his 95th birthday. And you cannot fill Buck's enormous shoes. You just can't. And I would be foolish to think that I could. And for me, though, Doc, it was an honor to walk in his shadow.
Yeah.
And because for me, his shadow is not something that weighs me down. It protects me. And so, and so I can't help but feel like old Buck looks over my shoulder every day. Not a single day that goes by that I don't think about him. And I talk to him almost every day. Now, he doesn't always answer me, but I still.
Hey, I'm not mad at you, man, because I'm sure he is there. And I'm sure he's watching over you. And if you ever start straying a little bit, you're going to feel a nudge or something.
Absolutely, put you right back in there. But no, man, you know, I know anytime that you get an opportunity in this life to do something that you understand is bigger than you are.
Yeah.
It is one of the most gratifying things I think that we can do. We live in such a me society. It's all about how much I can accumulate. What can I do with this and this? But here, our entire team understands that this is bigger than we are. But if we do it right, we have a chance to leave a legacy, something that will stand the test of time, that others will come and enjoy and learn. And that's what motivates us. And so, yeah, it is challenging. Anytime that you got to raise money, it's always a challenge. But for me, it is just an absolute blessing to get to do this work. There are days when I cannot believe that I get paid to do this work. You know, I got a chance to walk Henry Aaron through the museum. I sat and talked with Willie Mays. We've entertained American presidents and first ladies. I'm a kid from Crawfordville, Georgia, 500 people. You know, so it's been a tremendous blessing. Now, there are some days they don't pay me enough to do this, but it's more of the former than the latter. And at the end of the day, we know that this is good. And we are all motivated to give it everything that we possibly can to make sure that this museum is healthy and whole.
Well, thank you so much, man, for the privilege of this interview, man. I tell you, this is a highlight. I've interviewed some great people, but this is a highlight because not only are you a great person, but you represent some of the finest people who have ever walked this planet and who did it like nobody else. And man, I can't tell you how overjoyed I am with this opportunity. Thank you so much, man.
Man, it's my pleasure and my honor, and I can't wait to welcome you to Kansas City, here to the Negro Leagues Baseball.
And you know I'm gonna get some barbecue. You know, I'm coming strong when I come. I'm telling you right now.
I'm looking forward to it. You got my contact information, so you
Yes, sir.
let me know.
All right.
All right, Doc.
The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And the fight for our history and the determination to take control of telling our story, man, is absolutely central. Listen, if we did not have the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, if we did not have that museum, we would not have that repository of greatness. If we waited for Major League Baseball to acknowledge the greatness and didn't see and applaud greatness within ourselves, can you imagine if when the Negro Leagues hosted their own all-star games, if they waited for Major League Baseball to say, okay, y'all can have an all-star game? No, they had their own all-star game, right? I mean, they had their own diva. They had Lena Horne throw out the first pitch. You hear me? I mean, that is absolutely tremendous that these stars, these people who were leaders in our community would affirm and support one another. And we live in a day and time when we have to learn that lesson and learn how to do that again. We have to learn how to tell our own story and support and encourage our own to be the best that they can possibly be. Make sure you go to the website, tip your cap to the Negro League Baseball Museum. It is a tremendous, tremendous place, and I can't wait to get back there. You got to know the story before you can get on the field with the greats. You have to go through the museum and hear the story. And so I'm looking forward to doing what I need to do to get on that field. And I hope you will do the same thing. This is Dr. DZ Cofield for Real World, Real Talk, signing off. Until next time, God bless is my prayer.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real World, Real Talk. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes every week. Follow us via social media using the @RWRTDZ username on all platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To submit any comments, questions, sponsor opportunities, or future show suggestions, visit us online at rwrtdz.com or via email at info@rwrtdz.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you've been inspired to be the change you want to see in the world today. Until next time, be real, keep it real, and stay real.